Let the person look at his food. Yeah, I look at my food when I eat. Looks nice. This is not what this is talking about. But try to see, to go beyond that. You know what? Think about that. This is an ayah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, whatever is presented to me, I just eat it. But then after that, God knows what happens to it. Yeah, of course, now we study the biochemistry and all of these things, the digestion, the Krebs cycle, and all of these biochemical reaction. But does anybody focus on doing that? Oh, now I'm going to throw in some ATP or some ADP and get some ATP, or put some enzymes in here. We don't think about these things. Well, this is an ayah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَلْيَنْظُرِ الْإِنسَانُ إِلَى طَعَامِهِ. Something as close to you as your own food that we visit several times a day. But we don't stop and think and ponder about that. That's why it's a sunnah for us to stop for a second and say Bismillah before you start. Think for a second. You know? That's why the ayats of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are all over the world, all around us. We just have to stop and think for a minute. And this will only bring you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nothing purifies your heart like the closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What else would let us love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, will make us love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Again, pondering about His names. Anything else? Well, one other thing is to know how much Allah Himself subhanahu wa ta'ala loves you. Does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala love certain people? Yes? Like who? وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ التَّوَّابِينَ وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُتَطَهِّرِينَ. You know, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَ فِي سَبِيلِهِ صَفًّا وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. So there are certain people that Allah loves. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves His creation in general. But there are some specific people that have a special love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A proof to that, one of them, like I said earlier, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not send His punishment swiftly, but gives us time to correct the situation. I mean, how many times have we done certain things that deserve the punishment, and the punishment doesn't come right away? Allah gives us time. Isn't that a sign of Allah, of the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And if you look at all His names, the names that convey that meaning of tenderness, of love, are more than the names that convey the meaning of punishment. You know, much of the time we're used to, how should I say, favoring the side of fear, which is not always good, by the way. I remember there was one time, several years ago, you know, almost every lecture that I was invited to give was about the punishment of the grave, and hereafter. You know, hey brother, we want you to give a lecture. We want to make people cry. Why? SubhanAllah. You know, yes, we have to talk about the punishment and hellfire, because that's what keeps people in check. But what motivates me is to learn about Al-Jannah. And the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that convey that meaning of tenderness, of mercy, of forgiveness, are more than the names that convey the meaning of fear and punishment. Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Al-Ghafur, Al-Wadud, Al-Jalal, Wal-Ikram. You know, all of these names, subhanAllah, so many of them. Al-Sittiyya, you know, Al-Halim, Al-Mubdi', you know, that convey that meaning of tenderness. And that's a proof of the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to His servants. Another proof of the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to His servant is that for little actions, He gives tremendous reward. Small actions, He gives tremendous reward. You know, one example is coming up next week. What's that? Thursday. Before it. The greatest day. There's no greater day, as the Prophet himself said, there's no greater day, there's no day that is greater in the eyes of Allah than the day of Arafah. The day of Arafah. Now what is greater about the day? Arafah or Laylat al-Qadr? What? I didn't hear that. Sorry. So which one is greater? I mean, Laylat al-Qadr خير من ألف شهر. Come on. But yet the Prophet said, you know, there's no day أفضل عند الله من يوم عرفة. So which one is greater? Yes.
This is a night and this is a day.
Yes. The greatest day is the day of Arafah. The greatest night is the night of Al-Qadr. But again, back to that day coming up. One of the Prophet ﷺ, this is Sahih Muslim. The Prophet ﷺ said, Siyam Arafah أحتسب عند الله أن يكفر السنة التي قبله والتي بعدها. That fasting the day of Arafah, I expected to bring the forgiveness of a year before and a year after. One day, subhanAllah. But like, can you beat that? It's great. One day can give you that much. Well, isn't that a sign of the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for small action. You know, even a normal fasting day, an average fasting day, not the fard, but the fasting day, nafil day, the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, "Man sama lillahi yawman, ba'ad Allah bidhalika al-yawm wajhahu 'ala an-nar 70 kharifa." That anyone that fasts for the sake of Allah one day, with that one day Allah will take him away from hellfire the distance of 70 years. Well, that's a tremendous reward for one day. Of course, the day of Arafah is even more. That's a sign of the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you just imagine, another great sign is that the good deeds, the deeds when a person does something good, it is multiplied at least 10 times, or even more. The bad deeds are not multiplied. Isn't that great? Isn't that wonderful? The good deeds erase the bad deeds. That's what the Prophet ﷺ said, وَأَتْبِعِ السَّيِّئَةَ الْحَسَنَةَ تَمْحُهَا. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you know, وَإِنَّ الْحَسَنَاتِ يُذْهِبْنَ السَّيِّئَاتِ. The good deeds erase the bad deeds, which means when you do something bad, and we're all, you know, liable to do certain things at different times. This is not an encouragement to do that, but if it happens, what do? You follow it with something good. You follow it with something good. You don't follow it with something bad. You know, sometimes we do something bad, and you follow it with something another thing is bad. Yeah, for example, the brother looks at something haram. Oh, I'm not going to come to the masjid anymore. Who am I fooling? I'm not going to pray anymore. I'm not a good person. No. Even if you don't feel like it, you follow the bad with good. That's what the Prophet said, because it erases it. And this is one of the generosity of Allah, is that the good deeds erase the bad deeds. But you know the great thing, the greater thing, is that the bad deeds do not erase the good deeds. So whatever good you did is there. Nobody's going to touch it. It's there for you. That's a sign of the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The good deeds are multiplied. The bad deeds are not multiplied. The good deeds erase the bad deeds. The bad deeds do not erase the good deeds. If you intend to do something bad and you change your mind out of fear of Allah, then it will be written like a good deed. If you intend to do something good and you couldn't, it will be written as if you did. Jumu'ah to Jumu'ah is a forgiveness. Prayer to prayer is a forgiveness. What could be more generous than that? What could be more loving than that? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why a person just has to think for a little bit, and he will see the aspects of the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this will bring him closer and closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and will purify your heart and enrich it by nothing else. This is the path. Again, this is very brief, by the way. The topic is much bigger than that. But just as an introduction to the topic, that the path of tazkiyah is a process. It's that of a struggle. It's not in one action, and that's it. You go past it. It's something that we struggle with continuously. But this is what brings life and enjoyment to the religion itself, in this life as well as in the hereafter. Alhamdulillah. We're not done yet, by the way. I have some more materials. I just want to see if there's any questions. Otherwise, we'll go. Any questions or comments? Can I get a cup of water? Samir, can I get a cup of water?
There's a question.
Yes. I'm sorry. Yes.
Well, about the deeds, the good deeds that will not be erased. I hate sounding, as they say, ignorant, but in Surah Al-Hujurat it says,
أن تحبط أعمالكم وأنتم لا تشعرون. Yes, but look what it starts with. You know, yeah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله لا ترفعوا أصواتكم فوق صوت النبي ولا تجهروا له بالقول كجهر بعضكم البعض أن تحبط أعمالكم وأنتم لا تشعرون. Yeah, there are certain acts that may, how should I say, may even get into the kufr or something of that regard. In other words, disrespecting the Prophet ﷺ and shouting at him. This is something, what could take away the good deeds altogether? If the person becomes a kafir, if the person, that's it, the good deeds are gone completely. So that's why this may be reflecting to that in a way, almost like an offense to the Prophet ﷺ. ترفعوا أصواتكم فوق صوت النبي ولا تجهروا له بالقول كجهر بعضكم لبعض. So that's a different thing. But we're talking about, again, a person, an average act that the person is doing.
What are different ways to stay conscious, like that help you remind yourself Allah is present?
One of them is good company.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, exactly. What is the best way to remain conscious, to become conscious? I think one of the main factors, and that you can say that works for almost everything, is the good company. Why? Because, imagine if I'm around some people, some friends, that don't care about anything, and they keep telling you about the adventures that they did over the weekend, and how they did, and all of these things. Naturally, we desire these things, and it's going to start affecting. I want these things, and not only that, but then my struggle would seem monumental, it's too difficult. But when I'm around other people, other brothers that keep reminding me, then this would help, That's what the company would work tremendously. That's why, by the way, Islam is a religion of the Jama'ah, not the individuals. If you look actually at the individual when it is mentioned in the Quran, most of the time it is mentioned in a negative way. إن الإنسان لربه لكنود إن الإنسان لفي خسر لقد خلقنا الإنسان في أحسن تقويم ثم رددناه أسفل سافلين لقد خلقنا الإنسان في كبد. The person, the individual is singular. When it is mentioned in a negative way. But then the safety is mentioned in the plural. The example here is Surah Al-Asr. Allah says, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. So Allah says that man, after swearing, indeed, man is at loss in perdition. Man is at loss except those. Normally, the rule is that you will say everybody is at loss except the few that will do that. So you take the exception in the few from the many. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the opposite. And of course, linguistically, it's both ways bad depending on how it's said. And it is strong. There's a purpose to that. To indicate that the loss happens when you're by yourself, but the safety happens in the group. That's why you find the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when they're given in the plural. You don't find Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu. It's Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu. Like in Surah Al-Hujurat, 5 times. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu. It is not mentioned in the singular. You who believe, and then the command is given. That's why being in the group is something really tremendous. And here I'm not just saying about being around Muslims, period, but being around good Muslims. Because the fact is, we have Muslims that are good companies and Muslims that are bad company. And sometimes the bad Muslim company may be more dangerous than the non-Muslim company. So the best is to make sure that you're in good company. Somebody that will protect you. That's one thing. The other thing, wallahi, is the dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. SubhanAllah, this will never fail. You can say that about every problem that you're facing, everything, that the dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the dua can only bring good. Asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for protection. Asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for guidance, for clarity. Asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help, for support. The dua. Because there's no thabat, there's no steadfastness except through Him. Through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have a comment. From these sisters. How much time do we have for that? 20 minutes? That's fine. No question, I'll go on. We're not quitting yet, so we're staying. Yeah, I'm sorry. One is a story actually that I think for the reference that shows you what Iman actually does. A story of despair and hope. It's a story that I heard many years ago from Tarek Suwaidan. I didn't read it myself for reference. It's a story of despair and what Iman actually would do to the heart. And the story actually is narrated by Musayyib ibn Rafi' al-Ghul, of a man who was planning on killing himself and his son, and how Iman actually changes and brings the hope back to the person. So this is Musayyib al-Rafi' al-Kufi. He said, I was sitting among other scholars, and we were talking and discussing things. Then a young man enters the masjid, and he tries to sit close to us, trying to hear what we're hearing. And then one of us, mentioned a certain story, a certain funny story that happened to Imam Shafi, the great Imam Shafi, the greatest in his time. And he said that once Imam Shafi was sitting with his wife next to him, and a man came in. And there was just the two of them, Imam Shafi and his wife. And the man came in and he said, which of the two of you is Imam Shafi? Imam Shafi said, she is. Of course, everybody laughed. Everybody smiled and laughed. He said, but I looked at the face of that young man and he did not even smile. So I thought that something must have killed the happiness or the life in the face of that young man. So I went and I sat close to him. And I told him that, oh young man, I saw you so careful of sitting with us, close to us, but yet you did not smile. Everybody laughed and smiled. You did not do that. What's happening? And he said to me that, leave me alone. How will I smile when I'm on the edge of my own grave? One foot in this life, one foot in the grave. And he said, I'm alive, but my heart actually is in death. And I said to him, the man who said the story, he said, and I asked him that I had a young son who was your age, and he died. So every time I see someone like you, I connect with him. I'm really careful, I'm really eager to see how I can help you. Anything I can help, anything I can do to you. And he said that, leave me alone. I have a certain situation where there's no solution for it. Nothing is going to help. And he said, there's no solution except death that will take me and my problems. And he said to him, and I said to him, he said, it looks like you received a life sentence. That's it. You're going. And he said, yes, something similar to that. I have left my father at home, and my father is planning on killing himself. So then I said to him, to that young man, well, let's hurry up. Maybe we can catch him before he kills himself. And he said, no, he won't kill himself. I know. He promised me. He swore to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also he's waiting for me to go back so we can both kill ourselves at the same time. So if it was not his swearing, then it would be the promise or waiting for me to go there. And he had told me that if you want for us both to die together, you come at night. If not, then stay away until Fajr and bring the person who will wash my body. And he told him that, then why did you come to the masjid? And he said, I came looking for Imam Shafi, the great Imam Shafi. I wanted to ask him, can a Muslim kill himself? A Muslim whose life became the void of everything, who became the ultimate misery. When the problem happened, one after the other, until all of life, the whole life, became a big lie. Can a person like that kill himself? So I said to him that you sound like an eloquent person. Who's your father? And the guy told me, he said, the guy told me that my father is so-and-so, he's a very, very famous merchant. He became very rich and prominent, like the moon. But he says, just like the moon dies eventually, my father lost everything. And he said, we lost all our wealth. And I wish it was just the wealth, but all the diseases and the sicknesses you can think of are in my father. And I wish it was only that, but we lost the most important person in our life, his wife, my mother. She was the love of his life, and she left. She was the purpose of our existence. She was the light of our life, and then she has gone. Then we wanted to kill life itself. After my mother, his wife, died, we want to kill life itself. Then I asked him, you look like somebody very wise, not just eloquent. How could someone be that wise, but yet be so helpless, not find a way out of his misery? And he told me that this is the way it is. I want an Imam Shafi. So here, the person who narrates the story, Musayyib, he said, of course I can easily answer him, telling him that, of course, anyone that kills himself is haram. The Prophet ﷺ said in the Hadith al-Qudsi, عَبْدِي بَذَلَنِي بِنَفْسِي حَرَّمْتُ عَلَيْهِ الْجَنَّةِ. My servant brought himself or killed himself, I mean the Jannah prohibited for him. But he said, Musayyib, he said that this person does not need a fatwa. Does not need a yes or no answer. He needs the wisdom of Imam Shafi'i. He needs something much bigger than that. So I told him, and of course I wanted also to give him the wish, to grant him his wish. He wanted to meet the Shafi'i. I wanted to give him that. So I took him to the Imam Shafi'i, and on the way, he said that I started discussing with him, trying to talk him out of it. And he said to him, don't you know, by choosing to die, you have liberated yourself of everything that is worthy in nature. You have liberated yourself of life itself. So now you're above that. You can see things clearer than that. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might have put you in that position so you can help those that go through the same situation. Anyway, he's trying to give him an importance. That you can do something, you can make a difference. And he said, and I kept on talking to him until we reached the house of the great Imam Shafi'i. And he opened the door and he greeted us. And before the young man said anything, then I started talking to myself. I said, Ya Aba Umar, his nickname. This young man is this and that. And I started telling him the story with details so that he would understand that we don't need the fatwa. If it's a fatwa, you can mention it in general terms. But when he was mentioning it in details, then Imam Shafi'i probably might notice that I want something more than halal and haram. So I kept on telling him. So he said, I told the Imam, if a person kills himself because of the hardship of the life, of the situation, the difficulties, the deprivation, the loss of everything, when he go to hellfire, Allah guided him to you. And I told him that, and I kept on repeating that. Allah guided him to you. What would happen to him? Can he kill himself, his father, and himself? So the question is for the father and his son. So he said, if he killed himself and his son with him, would he go to hellfire? Allah guided him to you. Give him an answer. Then Shafi'i, of course, he understood. Imam Shafi'i was one of the greatest, smartest people that ever lived. I understood. And Imam Shafi'i said, then, wallahi, this man, the father, must be a dignified man. Must be a man with a lot of dignity. A person who has a lot of pride. But I cannot answer. I have to visit with him. I have to see him to give him the answer. And then I will give him the answer. Take me to him. So this young man then took Imam Shafi'i and Musayyib after his father. And when they reached the house, then the young man said that, let me jump over the fence and open for you because my father would not open. So he did, jumped inside, opened the door from the inside, and he went in. Imam Musayyib said, when we entered, we saw a man that looks closer to life, that looks closer to death than to life. And as soon as we entered, the Imam Shafi'i said, Assalamu alaikum, and he said, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَالصَّابِرِينَ فِي الْبَأْسَاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ وَحِينَ الْبَأْسِ أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ صَدَقُوا وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُتَّقُونَ. Those that persevere in times of difficulties and hardship, the verse, those that persevere in times of hardship and difficulties, and those are the ones that were truthful, and those are the pious ones. Then the man responded, and he says, Ya Shaykh, we had so much sabr, we persevered so much, until we were inflicted by something that no sabr actually can handle. There's no solution for me except the end, that it is the end. Then Shaykh said, let's open the window. And here, the window. And they opened the window. And when they opened the window, they said that actually the breeze came in, and with it, a little bit of life. Then the Shaykh talked to that man. And he said, listen to me. Listen to me until I finish. Then after that, you do whatever you want. Nobody's going to force you to do something or to prevent you from doing something that you want to do. Listen to the end. Have you heard of any Muslim who was afflicted by a sickness that left him bedridden, completely bedridden, for 30 years, and then dying afterward, after living 30 years, bedridden, but yet happily so? Living happily, bedridden for 30 years. And the man said, is there anyone in this dunya, in this life, that can go like that? And he said, yes, I know that. My own Shaykh. Imran ibn Husayn al-Khuzai. Imran ibn Husayn is the one that Umar al-Khattab sent actually to Basra to teach them. And Hassan al-Basri, he said that nobody came to Basra who was greater than Imran ibn Husayn al-Khuzai. Imran ibn Husayn became sick toward the end of his life, the last 30 years of his life, and he was completely paralyzed, completely bedridden. So here Imam al-Shah is saying that I went to visit Imam Imran ibn Husayn with his own brother, and we found him bedridden. His own brother started crying. And then he asked him, the one who was in the bed, asked his own brother who was crying, that what makes you cry? I have accepted what I have. I have accepted my situation. And I'm content with it. I'm happy with it. And he told him, how could you be happy with it? How could you be content with it? He said, that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose for me. And I'm content with the choice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he remained like that. He remained like that until he died. And that's, Imam Shafi'i was continuing. He said that, remember, that the believer, everything that happens to him is good. Quoting the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, if he was inflicted by a hardship, he would persevere and it would be good for him. If he was blessed with something good, he would be thankful and it is good for him. And he told him that the true Iman shows in times of hardship. Otherwise it will be an lip service. He says you cannot claim to have had that Iman when in times of hardship it will not show. And he says that's what you have to have. This is what it is. It's that sign. Otherwise it's a sign of cowardice. It's a sign of arrogance, of a revolt or an objection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Having an Iman will give you a second mind. Having a strong Iman gives you a second mind. Because when you have any problem or any hardship, sometimes your mind gets clouded and it takes a back seat. Then your Iman steps in to tell you that if you do something good, if you persevere, then the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there until your own mind comes back into the picture. And that's what happens sometimes. SubhanAllah, when you go through a certain difficulty, you cannot think clearly anymore. The only thing that could protect you in a situation like that is a strong Iman. When the mind is not functioning correctly anymore, then the Iman steps in. And he said to him, I know somebody else that actually went through even more than that. And he did not say, we persevered until there's nothing we can handle, until we had something that no perseverance can handle. And he mentioned to him the story of Urwa ibn Zubayr ibn Awwam. And he says, it is something that I've witnessed myself. Urwa ibn Zubayr ibn Awwam had to have his leg amputated because of a certain sickness. And they told him, why don't you take some wine or something that will get you drunk. This way you will not feel the pain anymore. And he said, I don't want to use anything that is haram. By the way, in case of necessities, if the doctor prescribed it, this is the note on the side, it can be permissible. But here, Urwa ibn Zubayr, the great Urwa ibn Zubayr, he says, I don't want that. And he said, let me start doing my dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once you find me going through that, or into that, then you do whatever you want. And he started his dhikr with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they started cutting. And he kept on saying, Subhanallah, Subhanallah. They cut through the skin, the flesh, and he kept on saying, Subhanallah, Subhanallah, until they started sewing the bone. And he kept on repeating, Subhanallah, Subhanallah, until eventually they had to put it in hot boiling oil to seal the wound. And he says that's when he fainted. And when he woke up, he didn't find his leg. But that's how far Iman actually can take a person. And he did not say, now back to Imam Shafi'i, he said, and he did not say, we were afflicted by something that no patience and no perseverance can handle. At that time, the person who was narrating the story, Musayyib, he said, then suddenly I found strength going back to the heart of that man. He stood up and he grabbed the hand of Imam Shafi'i. And he said, Allahu Akbar min ad-dunya. Allah is greater than this life. Allah is greater than this life. What are we, human? We're nothing but dirt. How could dirt be arrogant? How could we be arrogant before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How can we object to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed? Then Imam Shafi'i hugged him very tight. And he says, then be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ask Him to forgive you for your despair. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never let you down. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never gave up on you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you that Iman And it is that iman from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that saves you. That's why you put your iman before everything else. Even if your difficulties and your problems defeat you in this life, you will definitely defeat them in the hereafter. The reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the recompense of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will always be there. Imam Musayyib said, then we heard Adhan al-Maghrib. It was the time for Adhan al-Maghrib. Then Imam al-Sha'bi, he said, subhanAllah, this is something I have to read it literally from my notes because it's so beautiful. Imam al-Sha'bi, he said, go ahead and start making wudu. But let me tell you something that will be useful for you in this life and for your hereafter. He said, before you do the wudu, before you start with your wudu, I want you to keep something in your mind. Keep in your mind that this water for the wudu has a secret, has a spiritual secret from this life. And he said, this is not ordinary water. This is a water of ibadah. So it's a different water. And he said, keep in mind that this water has a secret, has a spiritual secret